Hello people. So I'm trying to clean up my channel a bit. I've taken my videos down from 150 down to 30 something, I think. Might be 50 something, I think it's 30. This is for a few reasons. Cleaning it up means getting rid of videos that are a bit emotionally not quite correct, like too angry for instance, or not politically correct in some cases. Like, it's easier to say something that's quote unquote politically incorrect if you absolutely know it's the truth, than if you're sort of like, oh, I'm putting this idea out there and I don't really know either way, because then you're taking a risk on something you're not even sure on, and you're more likely to sound like a lunatic. But mostly it's because of poor audio quality. So before, I think it was Jan 8th, or it might have been later than that, in 2024, I would just put together a video with all its ums and ahs and everything, which I used to do a lot more of, I think. Just attach it to an image and shove it out. And even though some of these are very insightful, I think, going back over them makes me cringe. So I've just privated or unlisted all of those. But the fact that I've deleted a bunch of videos means that there is some material that might be worth re-going over. So I'm basically doing this for a second time, and also I've gained little insights between when I have done previous videos to now. Some of them were like 2 years ago, so there might be some more insight. And with this chart, this is a person's chart that's out there in the world. There's more to the story, like more's been revealed of his personality and such like that. So I'm just going to do a very basic rundown of this person. His name's David Wilcocks. Now, the way I'm thinking to do the chart is to start with the channels. The channels are important because the channels are where experience comes from, I believe. I won't go into that in more depth, but these are the things that people experience a lot of the time. Some people might say it's the centers, but it is the channels. I'm pretty sure it's the channels. Then perhaps going into some of David's specific placements, but I haven't really properly fleshed out how I'm going to do this yet. The only thing I have really here is start with the channels. So let's start here with the root center. Or actually, let's not start down there with the root center. That's a crazy idea. Let's start with actually introducing who David Wilcocks actually is. So I'm hoping that I don't have to go through a real introduction here. I'm not introducing this to a class of people that I know have never heard of him. I think a lot of people in the quasi New Age community have heard of this guy. And for a channel like mine that talks about the law of one and human design, it's highly likely that people will have heard of him. For anyone that's involved in QAnon or anything like that, they will also have heard of him. So it'll be a vague introduction. And this guy is a New Age figure who's been on Ancient Aliens, if you're familiar with that show, who talks about a great deal of extraterrestrial and unusual political subjects, conspiracy types of subjects. He's someone that I paid a lot of attention to when I was young. I really was very devoted to his teachings and such, and I found other teachings that also worked well with me that linked to this guy. But in later years, it became clear through certain people that investigated him that a lot of what he said wasn't really on the level. So people that he would say were his insiders and such turned out to have fairly good evidence that these people were not insiders and were in fact con artists. Okay, so back to the root. The root here pushes out either way. So bear in mind, some of this is going to be my own theories on human design. It's not something that you'll find other people saying. But the root only pushes out. So nothing comes back down to the root. The root just pushes out. So it's a pressure center. And you can see that it highlights two centers either side of it. Now, a lot of people would say, with this being single definition, that this 32 can go back down to the 54 and inform the rest of the energy stream. But I don't think that's the case. I think that once the 54 pushes out to the 32, it stops there. And the 39, 55, 36, 35 become one channel. I know they're not on the same stream, but they become part of the discussion, so to speak, part of the life experience, and part of the same story. So a story starts at the 39 and it ends at the 35. What is going on here with the 5432, as I said, has become what I call a processing channel, and I call it processing because it changes depending on what else is going on with it. But we'll call it a processing channel, which is also kind of, in this case, is a projected channel. And what happens is if the being here decides to invite this channel into their other experience, then it will happen. That's how I believe a manifestor works. So David's experience starts with his own provocation, with his own anger, perhaps, or discomfort, say, with his grudge, even, with his past. And that's the past that relates to his soul. Now, there's quite a difference between the nodes on either side. So the south node on the soul side, spirit side, is different from the south node on the body side. The personality and design come from a different perspective. And I've noticed this strongly with people that I've had an electromagnetic channel with a personality versus when I've had an electromagnetic channel with the design side. So this is not about animalistic things. This is about the self, the soul, spiritual identity types of things. And this is where his experience starts. Now, not everybody's experience starts in the south node. It's because the beginning of his energy stream here is in the south node. Then we go over to the 55th gate, which is about the spirit. So this is the body returning the energy now. This is where the body comes back and says, yeah, I'm ready to push back against this. Then we obviously have an emotional self here. They define solar plexus. We have the gate 36, which is in his Mercury, and the gate 36 is all about crisis. So this can be a personal emotional crisis, or it can be a collective crisis. So it can talk about the entire world or the stock market or something like that. These are the people that have this mindset on the culture and what are the potential dangers of the future. Is also partly because of that expression, perhaps, a part that wants to live. It wants to live in the real world and in the day. It wants to have experiences, social experience and such. And then we go to the 35, which is in fact the solution to that. This 35, this expression, when it's with Saturn, will very much say you have to do the right thing, otherwise all this crisis will come about. And I think that's consistent with David's message, but we'll go into that later. Next, we'll go down to the 54. Now, the 54.3 is shown twice here. And the thing about the 54.3 is this is interesting because it kind of shows what apparently David pretends, but we will go into that in a little bit. I'll go through the mechanics and then I'll get to the specifics, like what's going on with him. But 54.3 is all about when it's difficult to be ambitious, because the 54th gate is about ambition, then the person uses secret means to get there. And then we move to the Uranus on both sides in the gate 32. And gate 32, one I've had in my life before with people and things, is the splenic sense of not wanting change. So it's that splenic sense of looking at the world and deciding precisely how much change is a good idea for the individual, for the group, etc. it won't commit to a revolution. So the 49 on the other side is all about how do we get the resources to the needy and such. But the 32 is about any revolution, any change that is happening, how does this precisely benefit me? How does it precisely benefit the group, perhaps? And only once the revolution has started to succeed will it then adapt to that. Now, this is quite important, I think. Now, I think, or I wonder, just throwing this in here after you've already got 10 minutes in, I wonder if this is a bit of a not self chart. And when I say that, what I mean is David's got in a lot of trouble. So he seems to be involved with people who may very well be defrauding others of millions of dollars and that have been actually taken to court for that. He's engaged with known scam artists that have been caught and that are not doing well in court. Now, it doesn't seem to me that somebody that is engaged in that kind of thing is somebody who is likely to be true self, even though when I'm really putting a model together, I want to try to get to a place where there isn't really a not self, where we sort of take on the best idea we can until it causes blockage and then we release that and move on to the next thing. But for the moment, I think that's the only really word I have in my vocabulary to explain. Basically, this chart, this person and this chart has a lot here that's disharmonious, that isn't working. And we're just going to have a quick look at why that might be. Bear in mind, I've just gone into the channels. Now there's more. There is specific placements, like I could talk about his sun or his moon on the contra side, which are very insightful. I could talk about this Jupiter and the coming transit of Pluto, the gate 38, the fighter, and it would, I think, give us a lot more flavour and insight into David. But this is not going to be a long video. I'm just going to kind of explain where I think it might have gone wrong here. Or not even where it might have gone wrong, but where the chart should have gone, it seems to me, and where it hasn't actually gone. So firstly, David's constantly talking about the harvest, a big mass arrest, a big stock crash perhaps, all of this kind of QAnon stuff. Like, he is constantly talking about crisis. So we can see this 36 in the Mercury really expressing itself here. But we see that Saturn links this 36, and where did that go wrong? So David is very, very often wrong, pretty much whenever he says anything like that. So why didn't this Saturn in the 35 stop him with all the things that he's been saying? We also see with an undefined ego that David would likely fall into codependence types of behaviors. So this is completely giving your emotion out, seeing someone as the almost like a child that you need to protect, and just not seeing any bad in them. And well, I can't say that I know that to be true. The pattern of when I've seen people do this and the enabling of very negative individuals does bear some similarity to David. And that's because without real control over this emotional center and without the willpower being there to push back against it, then this emotion just runs the roost. It doesn't have any boundaries. And if the person gains insight into their own emotional center and stuff, if they're using their strategy and authority and really gaining insight into this emotional center and not letting it run the roost, then there is some kind of functionality to that. There is the bringing back of the codependent ways. But without that and without the ego defined, then you're, I think, fairly likely to fall into that. One of the people that was interviewed for a con artist that David was very closely involved with, this guy was deposed. So someone just advising on this situation said that everything with David and Corey had seemed to be going okay, and then Corey had tried to not let David have money, and David had cried on the phone for ages. So it's like that he can't see that Corey isn't a good person, and that's a completely predictable thing that someone like that would try and do to you. And I think in general, one thing that is really not good for the emotional centre is solitude. Now, I'm sure there are some out there that have made it work, but I haven't met those people. I think that usually people with the emotional centre not defined are the ones that are way more likely to be able to handle solitude. And I think the emotional gates are almost all at the end with Pisces. So that's the end of the archetypal journey, and I think that's where everything kind of fuses together. And I think the emotional centre needs other people to like bounce ideas off and to enjoy company with and such. And so David's spending a lot of time alone, and I think he's just going a bit mad. And perhaps it's due to this undefined sacral, I'm not sure, but a pattern in some of David's life, work, whatever you'd say, is that a lot of people that are criticising him, he now has like investigators in criticising him, people doing live streams on how much of a fraud he is and such. One of the criticisms that comes up quite a bit, and I don't know the truth of this, but I can't see a lot of evidence to the contrary, is that David's quite lazy. He actually started a charity that obviously I don't know what it was meant to be doing, but he started a charity, loads of people donated to it, and then when the forms came out for it, because if you have a charity you have to give certain forms to the government to explain you're expensive, most of the money was spent on meals and entertainment. And I'm wondering if this 5432, has been affected by that laziness. I don't really know what the relationship between the undefined sacral and laziness per se is. The human design chart itself often says that projectors and manifestors shouldn't work full-time jobs and shouldn't be working too much. At the same time, that doesn't entitle people to be entitled con artists, I don't think, but who knows. Can't really speak to myself. I am a manifester, but I also have an illness, an invisible chronic illness. And while I have worked full time, and I did work very hard when I did work full time actually, and I was also battling illness on top of that, I spent a lot of time not working. So I can't really say how good it is for manifestors to work full time long term, but I strongly suspect that most manifestors handle it without cutting corners and all that kind of stuff. But this brings us to the 5432. Now, if it's a projector channel, like I've said, the projected channel, then we would expect kind of wisdom from it, because it doesn't really express itself until it's invited. But what did I say about the 32? The 32 is about very carefully watching for change and only adapting if that change has a precise utility for the individual. And it's in Uranus. Now, I think, in general, not to a fault, like you may have, say, Moon closely conjunct Pluto, and you'll be doing your Pluto your whole life, or some aspects of the ascendant might create that effect. But I think mostly the way people experience life is they start at the sun and they go down. Like, even when they're very young, they'll be their Mercury. But Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are things we need to put a little more work into. And that's where I think it seems to have gone wrong here. So David's 54 is that part of him that kind of pushes, I think, towards this utopian idea. But he doesn't use the 32, which is also in his chart, to slow it all down, to actually do the Uranian work and say how actually likely is a mass arrest, how actually likely is a stock crash. He doesn't do the actual work, and that's why he keeps coming out with all these pronouncements that are premature and wrong. And that's it. Those are the functional parts of his chart. Like I said, while there is more, I suppose we don't really need to go into them more because we're really focusing on David as a function, because we're not talking about a positive thing here, are we? Like, you go into someone's personality when you want to say something positive about them and stuff like that, but I'm really just explaining the functionality of how he could have gone not self. How did that happen? We don't know. We do know that David has taken a lot of drugs. What may have happened? And of course, like is often said in this area, if somebody has a bad childhood, that excuses absolutely nothing, because loads of people grow up with bad childhoods and sort themselves out. But I would wonder if David was listened to as a child, because if the projector channel here is so unhealthy, it kind of suggests the person wasn't taught to use it. But that's just a thought, because obviously it needs to be invited out. There's a lot of our psychological health that I believe is dependent upon people actually being interested in us. This is interesting also when you have adult relationships that are manipulative in some manner. You can see them trying to close down your projector channels. But when there's an adult-child relationship and the child has to always does yield to the adult, perhaps when the projector channel gets unhealthy, it just doesn't get sorted out. And the emotional center might also be relevant to that. Anyway, I'll add a little bit here, not as something I'm going to continue talking about, but as a sort of a little taste, a little bit of interest. So for me personally, I have struggled to come out of conspiracy. I really got into it when I just felt like nothing was going right, and I was quite ill but couldn't quite figure that out or articulate it, and everything just kind of seemed like hell. I got very into conspiracy, and David's own narrative was really what pushed that. And I found that when the moon goes around to the gate 54 is when those emotions are most likely to come back. And so I think, having paid a great deal of attention to David, this 54 shows up in my chart, even though I don't have the 54, as the not self behavior of getting very involved in conspiracy. Because what is the 54? The 54 is ambition, and ambition in this context is all about saying how great the future is going to be and all that kind of stuff, because we're all going to harvest and the economy is going to crash and the deep state is going to get taken away and all that kind of stuff. And that's part of deconditioning. When that energy comes along, when I've done things to throw off that energy, then it relates to other individuals that have had or do have that 54, and how I relate to them, how I relate to those themes. Because conspiracy is a very distorted version of the gate 54, whereas in my personal life with people I know, the gate 54 might mean something altogether different. Anyway, thank you for listening.